10 Russian missiles have struck the immediate perimeter of the Ukrainian presidential palace, setting the skies over Kyiv ablaze in a terrifying display of kinetic power. NATO intervened immediately. The battlefield in Ukraine these days has transcended the definition of simply being hot. The intensity has reached such a critical mass that one is forced to ask, is this merely a conventional war, or has a season of bonfires been ignited right in the heart of Europe? Russia has launched consecutive, large-scale airstrikes, seemingly calculated to demonstrate to the global community that any discourse regarding peace negotiations at this juncture is little more than a bedtime story. However, the true shockwave emanated from the target selection itself. These were no longer strikes against ammunition depots or radar stations conducted for tactical attrition. Cruise missiles have impacted the zone surrounding the Ukrainian presidential palace, the very nerve center of executive power in Kyiv. It was a message that required no verbal articulation. The conflict has transitioned into a new, far more volatile phase than any preceding it. While European capitals continue to harbor hopes that the fighting will gradually subside, the reality on the ground is sliding directly into a dry, combustible atmosphere, primed to erupt into a conflagration at the slightest spark. The atmosphere in Kyiv now mirrors a city placed on total war footing. It is a state of red alert, tense, chaotic, and trembling in anticipation of where the next missile will send its greetings. At this moment, let us peel back the layers of this incident, which is viewed as a severe storm warning on the Ukrainian horizon. When President Donald Trump declared that the Russia-Ukraine war could be resolved within 24 hours, provided President Volodymyr Zelensky accepted Washington's terms, many analysts posited that with his America First slogan and a tough stance toward European allies, Trump would rapidly compel Kyiv to sign an expedited agreement, closing one of the most tragic chapters of the 21st century. However, cold reality has shattered all such optimistic expectations. Instead of concluding, the hostilities have erupted with even greater ferocity. Russia has intensified its military campaigns, Ukraine continues to receive influxes of Western weaponry, and NATO is increasingly being drawn deeper into the vortex of confrontation. The war has not ceased, rather, it has shifted into a phase of full-scale escalation, plunging the entire Eastern European region into profound instability. In this context, Russia decided to deliver a blow, likened to lightning in the night sky, a strike that was not merely military but a full-spectrum psychological attack. The large-scale airstrikes, aimed directly at the environs of the Ukrainian presidential palace, the supreme symbol of Kyiv's power, demonstrated a definitive strategic shift in Moscow's calculus. No longer resorting to sporadic strikes aimed at weakening the rear, Russia sought to drive a dagger directly into the center of power, sending an unmistakable signal: we can reach your heart at any time. An already brutal war has now entered a new chapter, where even the slightest miscalculation could precipitate an uncontrollable disaster. At approximately 5:00 a.m., while the citizens of Kyiv were still deep in slumber, they were jolted awake by a horrific tableau. The capital's sky was torn asunder by deafening roars. 10 Russian Kh-101 cruise missiles streaked through the darkness like deadly specters, vectored directly toward the area surrounding the Ukrainian presidential palace. This was not a routine sortie. The assault is believed to have been meticulously planned by Russia, with the objective of not only degrading infrastructure, but sowing terror in the very heart of Kyiv's governance. During the previous 46 consecutive waves of attacks, Russian missiles and UAVs had rained down on key sectors in districts such as Niki, Solomyansky, and Podilsky, densely populated residential zones interspersed with strategic headquarters. Explosions followed one after another, sending columns of fire rising high into the air, turning the entire Kyiv skyline into a sea of red flames stretching to the horizon. Ukraine's integrated air defense network, comprising Patriot, NASAMS, and Spartan batteries, was mobilized to maximum capacity, executing a dense interception screen. Yet, they could not completely avert the nightmare. Several missiles slipped through the defensive umbrella, flying straight into extremely sensitive targets. detonating merely a few hundred meters from the presidential palace. Witnesses recounted that the concussions shook the ground, shattered windows, triggered blaring alarms, and made the sky appear to detonate directly above their heads. Coordination centers were paralyzed, and power grids were severed in multiple districts. All of Kyiv was engulfed in smoke and chaos, resembling a city that had just endured the full fury of total war. This attack was clearly not aimed solely at physical assets. It bore the hallmarks of a psychological preemptive strike, designed to crush the resistance of the Zelensky administration, while serving as a cold reminder from Moscow that no sanctuary exists on Ukrainian territory, not even the presidential palace. The scene in Kyiv in the aftermath of the attack is nothing short of hell on earth. Eyewitnesses at the scene recounted in shock deafening explosions, giant pillars of fire rising dozens of meters high, painting the heavens red. The earth trembled, glass shattered. To many observers, Kyiv looked as if it had just suffered a catastrophic, large-scale detonation. The once bustling streets were transformed into a battlefield. Buildings collapsed, and charred vehicles lay abandoned amidst the rubble. Sirens wailed incessantly, mingling with human screams. The rush of ambulances and the chop of helicopters circling overhead. Amidst the chaos, rescue teams, firefighters, and volunteers rushed into the sea of flames. Disregarding the danger, soldiers struggled to extinguish the massive fires engulfing entire neighborhoods, frantically attempting to rescue those still trapped beneath the debris. In an effort to reassure the public amidst the disaster, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, also considered a leading contender for the presidency in the future, went on emergency radio broadcast. His voice rang out with resolve amidst the sirens. "We are racing against time, but believe that Ukraine will not be defeated. Kyiv will stand firm." His words of reassurance acted as a cool breeze in the midst of a raging storm. Yet, everyone understood that the wounds Kyiv had suffered were profound. It was not merely the destruction of physical infrastructure, but a heavy blow to the psyche of an entire nation. Amidst the piles of rubble and billowing smoke, Kyiv, a symbol of Ukraine's indomitable will, has endured one of the most brutal onslaughts since the war began. The true objective was to strike directly at the nerve center of Ukrainian power. According to military experts, this recent attack was not simply aimed at degrading infrastructure like many previous campaigns. It was designed to be a steel fist, striking directly at the will to resist of the entire Ukrainian ruling establishment. The simultaneous targeting of 10 cruise missiles at the presidential perimeter was no coincidence. It was a cold message. There are no no-go zones for Russian attacks, not even the highest echelons of power. This preemptive strike possesses a dual strategic significance. First, it sows existential fear among the leadership, demonstrating that Russia is fully capable of reaching the apex of power at any moment. Second, it undermines the public's belief in the inviolability of the government, thereby eroding its ability to control society in wartime. Although Kyiv authorities have strictly cordoned off the scene and suppressed specific casualty figures, leaked sources suggest that panic has begun to creep into the leadership. It is not only the tangible damage caused by ordnance, but the invisible cracks in Ukraine's mental defense. Experts warn that if Russia continues to maintain this tempo of psychological warfare, Kyiv's will to resist will gradually erode, rendering battlefield operations even more effective. A significant question immediately arises: is Russia actively targeting President Volodymyr Zelensky for elimination? The answer, according to many military analysts, is not simple. First of all, Mr. Zelensky's whereabouts and schedule are kept as state secrets. Since the outbreak of hostilities, he has become a shadow in the heart of Kyiv, constantly moving, altering locations according to unpredictable schedules, and protected by a multi-layered security apparatus. Any intelligence leak could lead to disaster, so all data related to the president is controlled with extreme tightness. Second, the Ukrainian presidential palace has been fortified into a deep underground bunker, virtually impenetrable. This structure is designed to withstand not only conventional munitions but also tactical nuclear strikes, a rare security standard in Europe. Third, the multi-layered defense grid, protecting the central zone is densely saturated with radar, anti-aircraft missiles, and electronic warfare systems. This makes approaching and eliminating Zelensky with conventional weapons a nearly impossible task. However, analysts believe that Russia's true objective is likely not the immediate physical removal of Zelensky. Instead, the strategy appears to be psychological attrition, launching threatening strikes to force the Kyiv leadership into a state of constant insecurity. This tactic aims to weaken the will to fight, thereby undermining the Ukrainian government's ability to make rational decisions in future negotiation rounds. In other words, Russia seems to want Zelensky to surrender mentally before any new military offensive is fully launched. Immediately after the airstrikes shook Kyiv, NATO's early warning radar system in Poland sounded a condition red alert. Without hesitation, Polish F-16 fighter jets scrambled, shooting up into the sky like silver arrows to commence continuous 24-hour reconnaissance missions. Poland's defense minister quickly issued a firm statement: "We will not allow any Russian missiles to cross the red line. Any provocative action will receive an appropriate response." The NATO Secretary-General also reinforced this stance, emphasizing that any attack on NATO territory or allies would face a comprehensive, collective response. The atmosphere of war quickly enveloped the entire eastern flank of NATO. In particular, Poland, considered the vanguard of defense against any Russian offensive, shifted to its highest military readiness level. Ground-based radar stations and surveillance satellites continuously tracked every-minute movement in the skies over Ukraine and adjacent areas. Air defense units, from Patriot batteries to systems equivalent to the Iron Dome, were placed on hot standby, ready to react instantaneously if any signs of intrusion were detected. However, NATO's deepening involvement also raised significant concerns within the international community. Just one technical error, one unexpected accident, or one misunderstanding in the airspace could plunge Russia and NATO into a direct kinetic confrontation, and if that happens, it will open the gates of hell that humanity has tried to keep tightly shut since World War II. When the world's two largest military blocs collide, the consequences will certainly not be confined to Ukraine. The flames of conflict could engulf Europe and spread beyond the continent. Amidst escalating tensions, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova delivered a message viewed as a de facto ultimatum. She declared that any foreign military presence on Ukrainian territory, regardless of nationality or mission mandate, would be considered by Russia as a direct threat to national security. This message leaves no room for ambiguity. It means that if Britain, France, or any NATO member state deploys troops to Ukraine, whether under the guise of peacekeeping or humanitarian aid, Russia will classify it as an act of war and will respond without mercy, targeting entities far beyond Kyiv. This warning was also directed at Brussels and Washington, the centers of NATO and U.S. power, by drawing a definitive new red line. Moscow is forcing the West to calculate the risks carefully before taking any action that could be interpreted as direct military intervention. Observers note this is not merely a diplomatic statement, but a final warning before Russia potentially escalates its military response. As tensions mount, Ukraine continues to lobby diplomatically, urging Britain and France to rapidly deploy peacekeeping forces. The British and French defense chiefs have reportedly traveled to Kyiv for clandestine, closed-door meetings with President Zelensky and senior military commanders. These meetings took place as Kyiv urgently sought a Western military presence to bolster its defenses against mounting Russian pressure. Shortly thereafter, 3 NATO member states convened in Brussels to discuss force deployment plans. The UK and France are spearheading an initiative to send European troops to strategic towns in Ukraine to monitor and ensure the implementation of a potential ceasefire, should Kyiv and Moscow reach any truce in the future. However, all moves are being made with extreme caution. The West understands that any military presence, even under the banner of peacekeeping, carries the risk of serving as a tripwire for a full-scale war with Russia. Divisions within Europe are becoming apparent. While London and Paris are forward-leaning, many other capitals such as Berlin, Rome, and Madrid remain wary, constantly haunted by the costly lessons of the last century. Amid heated discussions about deploying European forces, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke out strongly, warning the West about the potential consequences. Speaking to the press, he emphasized that British and French leaders are deluding themselves if they believe that sending troops to Ukraine can alter the tide of the war. According to him, every global catastrophe in modern history has stemmed from Europe's belligerent actions. This is not merely a political statement, but a stark reminder that military intervention in Ukraine today could spark a chain of uncontrollable disasters, just as small sparks in Europe once set the world ablaze in 2 world wars. Russia asserts that any Western armed intervention in Ukraine will not be tolerated, and participating nations will face catastrophic consequences. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Britain and France are allegedly drafting much longer-term plans. Diplomatic sources suggest one scenario under discussion is to deploy European troops over the next 5 years, under the guise of peacekeeping or security support, aiming to establish a semi-permanent presence in Eastern Europe, particularly in areas bordering Russia. The goal is to maintain constant military and diplomatic pressure on Moscow, containing Russia's power and influence within specific limits. To put it bluntly, although no formal declaration of war has been made, NATO is gradually tightening its encirclement of Russia. This is a protracted geopolitical war where covert maneuvers can be just as lethal as a hail of missiles on the battlefield. That concludes today's analysis. What are your thoughts on these developments? Leave your comments below, and remember to subscribe to the channel to follow the next geopolitical breakdown.